Next up, she is the founder of Grow Our Game, a program that empowers young girls through confidence, passion, and sisterhood. While they learn the game of basketball, her impact in the basketball community has been felt throughout New York City. Please welcome Queens native, that's what's up, Queens native, Cheyenne Joy Jones. Woo! I'm gonna get this right. Okay. I'm gonna get this right. I think I'm overthinking it right now. Next up, he is a 17-year NBA veteran out of the Bronx. Since retiring from the game, he has worked in the athletic departments of the University of Memphis, the University of Kentucky, and the University of South Florida. Currently, he serves as a program manager of Team Ignite of the NBA G League, developing elite high school players. Please welcome former New York Knicks, Rod Strickland. Right. So we're gonna just dive right on up in here, okay? Each of us grew up in New York, right? Which is cool as heck. Which is cool as heck. Queens in the house.
I'm about to say,
okay.
Queens.
I know this is right. This is my Queens. This is my Queens people right here. So please, let's start by sharing our, a New York experience in sports and how that translates into coaching these kids in this city. You want to start with you, Rod?
Man, New York City raised me. Just being able to play in the park. Basketball is different now. The world is caught up, but there was a time where New York City was everything. And when you left the city and you walked in the gym, like that was a big deal. And just playing around the city, playing against some of the great players that we might not even know their names. And it was always competitive. I tell people my competitive edge comes from New York. You walk in the park, and even as I rose up the ranks, I always had that guy who thought he was better than me and thought he was tougher than me and wanted to embarrass me. So, I had to be prepared. Like I always tell people, I had to win the battle. So I had to get on the court, I had to outplay you, and then I had to beat the team. So, I go from there, I go from college, I go to the NBA, I'm competitive.
That's that New York spirit, though.
Yeah.
That's how it gets down in New York. What's that park, West 3rd Street in the Village?
West 3rd.
Well, I'm West 3rd, though. You come up West 3rd. Right? So these guys are out there balling, and they were playing like they were playing in the NBA. Right? So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, everything was competitive. So, it just translates from me to my pro career, and then being a coach or trying to develop kids, just having that understanding of what it's all about.
Right.
If you really want to do this, there's a way you have to do it. There's a work ethic. You got to really be into it, and then you got to be competitive because it's only a few. Not many are going to make it, and we know that. So you have to be different. Probably have to have a different edge, a different spirit about basketball.
That's the New York City hustle right there.
So I think for me, without giving away my age, back when I played, we only had 2 teams in the city that traveled, right? It was the Liberty Bells and it was the New York City Gauchos. This was back in the mid-90s. To be on one of those 2 teams, you actually had to be really good. Right? Like it was actually the A team, the A team travel. And a lot of times, again, I played with the Gauchos back in high school, and there were times that we couldn't even go to AAU Nationals because the boys ended up taking the money to go to Nationals, right? So there were times where we qualified and we had beat the Liberty Bells. Walter Welsh, he still has that video of us celebrating, and we didn't even have a chance to go because our boys ended up having the funds to do such. We didn't. Right? So I think, again, now, when I think about New York City girls basketball especially, there's 50 million teams, right? There's 50 million teams. And I'm not saying that that's not okay, but I think the biggest piece that we need to get to an understanding is that what is our purpose in coaching these young girls, right? Is it just to travel and have all of these vacations? Or is it to actually get girls to college? And so if it's to get girls to college, you need to have a different type of trajectory. And again, if you're just here for recreational play, don't waste those families' monies traveling all over the place.
Good point.
Because that same amount of money, the tens and thousands of dollars that those families actually spent on a hope and on a wish, that could actually went to a down payment on a house. Now we're talking about changing generational poverty. So I think that that's the bigger piece for me, Colette. That was the difference from when I played then to now, for girls at least.
Yeah. Jason?
Yeah, I think for me, growing up in New York City and just think about like the impact that basketball had on my life, and specifically growing up in Queens, I think one of the things that my parents did, because they didn't play organized basketball, was they always got me in great situations around great people to really teach me and mold me. And then it was probably when I got around 7th grade, I really started getting good. Then they had me start going up to Harlem. And just to put this in perspective, like, now I know it's different, but I was in 7th grade taking 3 trains to Harlem by myself.
From Queens.
From Queens. And it just gave me a different perspective. And then one of my first youth coaches at the time, his name was Tom Swinton. And we wound up being on the travel team. And he was my travel coach. We wound up winning small fry in New York City and going out to Racine, Wisconsin. I just say, like, just really touching on just my own personal experience. And I think what it lends itself to is what one of the things that Coach Showalter said is like having a love for the game. And because I always had a love for the game, which was probably driven by the fact that I was pretty good, it always motivated me to want to do more and want to do better. So for me to get on trains and go to Harlem or go wherever it was to play basketball, like that's what I wanted to do.
You were serious about it.
Yeah. So I think that, for me, that's just kind of how, when I remember just like the impact of basketball, on my life and kind of how it inspired me to even get involved with some of the things that I do now as far as giving back really started that way.
Right on. I'm gonna partake in this question as a girl, and I'm so glad you touched on this for our girls. We're a lot of times overlooked. I just happen to love football. Football was my sport of choice, and Jason and I were talking about this earlier before we came out here, and he was asking me, how did I get involved in football? And it was just a sport that I love. The same way you guys love basketball, I just love football. Like basketball too, but football was my sport, but there was no place for me for a girl in football. So I played in the street with the boys, and when they said I couldn't play, I was like, I live on this block, son. I'm playing, right? And that's that. And so now you figure all this Pop Warner football teams were coming up. I wasn't allowed to play because I was a girl. So on an organized capacity, I wasn't allowed to. So my football playing days were over. It was, finish high school, go away to college, that was it. Until I found football at the age of 42. I started playing professional full-tackle football for the New York Sharks. And I was a running back my rookie year. A rookie at 42. But I wanted to be a running back so bad, like Curtis Martin and Franco Harris, and then I discovered I didn't like getting hit. Right? I didn't like it. I wanted to do the hitting, so I moved over to defense, and I turned into a defensive back. I was a safety. But New York built me. Playing in the streets, like Rod was saying. Like this is where it's at. I mean, New York is definitely where it's at. Jason, I'm going to hit back with you right now. Your program has seen long-term success, spanning over 2 decades. What advice can you give to newer programs so that they can reach that level of longevity as well?
Yes, I think 2 things jump out at me is that one, you have to be led by your passion. And if you're driven by your passion, then everything else will fall into place. And I think the second thing is just kind of be flexible about like your mission and goals and purpose. Because for me, when I first started in 1999, my purpose for starting Big Apple basketball is totally different than what I do now. So it's, things will change. When I first started Big Apple basketball, we were a pro touring team that traveled around playing Division I colleges and universities and exhibition games. And at that time, you know, that helped propel guys to get overseas jobs. And then I kind of, you know, that experience then led me to begin working with the youth and creating scholarship game programs. And now, you know, a lot of things that we do now are more collaborative efforts, and we're hired by the New York City Housing Authority to run summer programs and helping kids navigate, you know, schools and high schools and prep schools and helping to place kids in college. So I think that, you know, for me, it's always about really addressing the need. And I think for me, I'm usually able to understand the need because I'm still living in the community and pretty well touched in terms of like what I believe and having discussions with people in terms of what the need is. But you know, that can change from year to year. You know, so I think as long as you're led by your mission and really are flexible as far as what you're really being led to do, then I think that will lend itself to longevity.